Okay. Hi, everybody. This is our first talk as a botanical encounter, and we are the greatest pleasure to introduce you our first speaker, who is Dr. Georges Felix. So George is with us since this morning. He ran a walk from the Green Park Farmers Market to City Park or City Farm. And now he's going to speak about urban agriculture across latitudes. So George is a French Puerto Rican agroecologist. Currently, he's the co-chair of the Stabilization Agriculture Program at the Center of Agroecology, Water and Resilience at Coventry University in England. And besides, he works with Cultivate, and he co-teaches the Stabilization Agriculture module within Coventry University's MS Agroecology, Water and Food Sovereignty program. And it is very strange how my voice is echoing, so I think it's better if I just hand it over to George.
Hi, everybody. Thank you, Christina, for having me here. So my name is, I'm going to be recording here on the Zoom, but it's strange that we have like echo. Yeah. Maybe. We're having an echo thing here. Will that work? Now? Yeah, okay, perfect. Super. So technical issue solved. So thank you all for being here. I'm George Felix. I'm French Puerto Rican, and I teach agroecology and farming systems ecology in Coventry. And I also collaborate in the Caribbean and many other places, including France, the UK, West Africa. And this is what I want to share today. More than a lecture, it's really a sharing of knowledge, of experiences. So in different contexts, yeah. So for those of you who who eats every day? Yeah, of course, right? Several times we eat, all of us eat a little bit, and that food comes from a farm somewhere, whether it's rural areas or urban areas or many kilometers away or very close by. Somebody is producing food for us, right? If we are not producing it ourselves. But in many cases in cities, which are places that are not necessarily characterized for that agricultural economies, for those agricultural economies, there's still food growing somewhere, whether it's in parks or in home gardens or in city farms around the urbanization. And it's true that there's a trade-off between land available for food and ecosystem services versus land available for urbanization, no? And so there's always this tension between those, but it's not impossible. And we have seen, and I'll show you a number of examples where the urban areas coexist with the food production areas, or the other way around. This first image is just a clarification on what do we mean by urban farming. There are many ways of having food in a city, from a balcony pot to an actual vertical building where you have lights and artificial things, and everything counts really. There's a number of considerations that we want to have. We can see like there are two basic differences: soil farming versus soil-less farming. Yeah, so that's like all the hydroponics and stuff. So you have like classic urban agriculture with soil, with compost on a field, or a piece of land in the city, no? And you can have very high-tech technologies, you know, like high technology where you have a lot of light, a lot of water, and those can be soilless, no? And that's like another synonym for that is hydroponics, where you grow food on water. And that's like a really interesting technological advance as well. But I focus mostly on the low tech, so farming systems that require natural components and not necessarily so much external input, no? So the low technology, more accessible for farmers, more democratic, and also quite knowledge intensive as well, no? You have to deal with the making of the soil, with the pests and diseases, and there's more or less control of what's happening on the farm. But I like I prefer, let's say, the systems where you have less technology. So I'm going to share just some ideas, some experiences. I hope that's interesting. And the little plan for today is to discuss briefly what are the issues at stake, some examples of urban agriculture practices, some theoretical elements of services and functions and structures as well. And we can also say decompose a bit what could we do to go forward with these kinds of initiatives. It's really a knowledge sharing. I belong to Coventry. I work for Coventry University currently, but I've worked for other institutions, and those are the logos that you can see there. So I did my PhD at Wageningen in the Netherlands. I've worked in the University of Puerto Rico in Utuado, and I also am a part of and co-founder of Cultivate, which is like a Dutch NGO for land food health, for healthy food, land, and community. So several hats and many ideas. First of all, the idea, there's an ecological principle of structures and functions. So structures determine functions. In this case, it's in Spanish, but I'm sure you will understand what it means. When you have a structure like an ecological structure that protects you from flooding, the function, the service is accomplished. If you don't have that structure, then the service becomes a disservice, no? Like the contrary of a function. And in this case, this is not necessarily linked. It's an image that is not necessarily linked to food production, but it's an ecological structure that protects, from flooding. And it's pretty much the same in urban areas. If you don't have the plants or the trees, the functions will not be there, no? For example, in a park, if you don't have the shade, you don't have the shade if you don't have a tree. So the structure needs to be there. Same for the food production systems. You need to have those structures there, the places where food can grow or animals can thrive in order to obtain a service. Basic mathematics. And then there's like, at a more global scale, there are changes that are happening. So there are many projections, and this is one of them. It's not necessarily that everything that is projected will happen, but it's very likely. And one of the most likely events that can happen is that temperatures are rising. We are seeing it even in Britain. Rainfall patterns are shifting. So what used to be a dry season now is a rainy season, and so these patterns are changing. And also the amount of rainless periods is shifting. No? So we're seeing that in periods that we had more rain at points, now we're having less rain or environmental changes, and that's something that we can't do much about. But in a city, we do have an impact, a negative impact on biodiversity. And the idea is, how can we reverse that through food production? So how to combine these ecological structures with like food production structures and counter a bit the temperatures and obtain more services. So this is another example. This is something that we can do to reverse, no? Typical image of a garden maybe in the United States or possibly in Britain as well, where there's monoculture of something that doesn't really provide a benefit versus a lawn transformed into a small farm where you can have like lots of services and not only food, but also colors, flavors, medicine, habitat for biodiversity, microorganisms working their way. And a hidden aspect of it is the networking. When you have like a very diversified lawn like this, you have more probabilities to discuss with your neighbor and share some of the products than if you don't have that. Yeah. So there's a hidden gem in urban farming, which is community building. There are also disasters. So I spoke about climate changes and extreme climate events. And this is a before and after of a hurricane in the Caribbean, specifically in Puerto Rico. And it's an urban farm. You can see that the damage was incredible. It was a very strong hurricane event, Hurricane Maria, category 5. Sorry for that. There was a lot of damage, but there's also things that survived. Yeah, and that's the capacity of diversified farming systems, is that when there's an extreme event, it could recover faster because there are many more opportunities for recovery than if there was only one thing. So that's an example from a friend of mine, and this is a personal example. This is a small urban garden coastal ecosystem in Puerto Rico as well, and I will take you through the whole process. 2010, it was a food desert, and we, with a few of my neighbors, we managed to transform it in very little time to a small garden where medicine and some food was produced. And in less than 4 years, we had already a small agroforestry plot. Yeah, agroforestry means combination of crops and more perennial plants. So you have a number of species there, and this has evolved, of course. This is already 10 years ago. But when there's a hurricane event that was in 2017, it was a complete devastation. Yeah, it was completely devastated. You can see that the land is bare again, and it seems like nothing survived. But in fact, because the place was so diversified and the soil was quite rich, just a few weeks afterwards, we already have some biomass growing up. And that biomass was used to regenerate the soil. And from the plants that actually resprouted, we managed to accommodate those survivors. Yeah. So for example, some of the banana plants survived and some of the root crops survived. And that was great because not everything was lost. Right? And just a few months after the extreme climate event, you see that the structures are nearly similar to before the hurricane. And that's an advantage of diversified farming systems. More images here. And again, a hidden gem that we often don't speak about is the benefits for biodiversity. Yeah. So this small plot that was basically a food desert is also a food, or is also an oasis for biodiversity and for nature conservation. This is the only graph I will show you today. I am a scientist, but so I cannot help myself from having graphs. But this is just an example from Japan after a disaster event, post-disaster food and nutrition from urban agriculture. And you can see that there are many elements, many nutrients that we can obtain from farming systems, not necessarily at the same rate all across the year. But there are peaks, and you can see like energy and different periods of the year. There are food shortage periods and food abundance periods. So that's another thing, that agriculture, not only urban agriculture, is dynamic in space and in time. Yeah. And that's something that we often forget, because when we go to the supermarket, we always have tomatoes. No matter where they come from, we always have tomatoes or zucchinis. But zucchinis and tomatoes don't grow year long. in a place like Britain. So it's something that we have been alienated from, this temporality. And it is an effort, it is a bigger effort to think about what is the crop that is from the season, the seasonality of our foods. But this graphic is just to show that there are a number of, there are moments during the year that we can obtain more food than others. And also, after a disaster, you can see that, for example, after March, I think this was Tokyo. I don't remember which disaster it was, but basically there was no food during those months, and nearly like 2 or 3 months after the event, there's already some nutrient coming on. Yeah, and I think that's the important bit, that from zero we went to quite some percentage, at least 10% of self-sufficiency in one of our nutrients. You can find more theories and more examples and more of practices and principles of urban agroecology in different chapters or books. But I think that the best school is when we do it ourselves, whether it's on the balcony or in a plot. We practice and we learn and we share knowledge. So you might be familiar with some of these. Like, there are two elements on this slide. Is on the right hand side you have the practices, some of the practices that are recommended for urban farming, where you can intensify ecological processes in a small piece of land, and also what that means for the food system. So the shorter the chain, the shorter you have food close to your home, the more direct is that link. But the farther you go, in supermarkets or food delivery services, the more intermediaries you have, means that the food is produced very far away. Even if it's a few kilometers, there's many intermediaries. So many people are touching your food before it gets to your plate. And that is something that is structural in our system, but it's not something that is permanent, and it's something that we can reverse as well. We can take more control of our own food and medicine. An example of urban agriculture that has been quite successful for a number of reasons, and Cuba, in Cuba, which is like a very particular economic and political system, but still the example of Cuba showed that there are many urban farms, more than 350,000, small farms, of course, covering more than 50,000 hectares, which is a big chunk of land. And they produce more than 70% of the food that is available for urban citizens. Yeah, and that's a big chunk. And just to mention a detail as well is that in this country, all urban agriculture needs to be organic by law. And that's a big advancement, because it means that because we are in an urban setting, we don't want to spray any chemicals. So that makes it even more interesting, because opposers to organic agriculture or agroecology or permaculture philosophies will say that it's impossible. But Cuba shows the example that it is possible, and it is producing a lot, and it's not just playgrounds for people to hang out together. They're also very productive spaces that can have like a very important economic consequences or benefits, let's say. And there are two for the design of farming systems in general, but more specifically for urban agriculture, in terms of the biophysical dimensions. You have plant health and you have soil quality. Yeah, those are the two pillars. You need to have like a good soil quality in order to have healthy plants. And those two pillars are the entry point to discuss more global and wider political reorganization of the system, in order that the effects of urban farming and even in rural areas are transformative for the people who produce. For example, like an example would be that food is like agriculture should be efficient, no, should produce a lot. But when we go through these two entry points of soil quality, we assess the level of microorganisms that are in the soil, the level of earthworms and fauna that is found in that soil, and we link that to the healthiness of the plants. We can also link that to the healthiness of the people, right? And moreover, when we gain control of our soil, we produce our own compost, we produce our own nutrient-rich foods, we can also negotiate better the prices or democratize more where we sell our food. Yeah. So, and for who are we feeding? That's my point. Speaking about plant health, so we were walking this morning and we saw some plants that had yellowish spots, and that can mean many things. It can be things related to pests and diseases, but it can also be like soil conditions. And so you can see here, I know it's in Spanish, but you can see an idea of what different things can happen to your farm, to your crops, yeah. And the difference from an agroecologist for an agroecologist compared to a classical agronomist is that the classical agronomist will immediately tell you that your plant is sick and that you need to spray something that you need to buy from somewhere else, and very probably that something that you have to buy is toxic for yourself. But the reality is that all plants have their lifespan, and they have their issues with soil, and they have their interactions with other plants or other insects, and that is something that is normal. What needs to be integrated, from my point of view, is that knowledge on what does that mean and how can I redress it instead of combat it. No, how can I live with that instead of attack the symptom? And so I think that's one of the main differences between agroecology and classical agronomy. Is like we are transforming problems into potential solutions, and not necessarily attacking and making warfare to whatever's not working in my sense. So it's like a different shift of mindset, and that's valid for urban as well as rural farming systems. This other graph is it's also a bit of a theoretical graph. So the idea is that in time things change, yeah. And in terms of soil quality, what we want is to improve it instead of degrading it. No, and there's a term that has been coined for a few years already, and it's the opposite of degradation, is aggradation. How do we also create systems, design systems, farming systems that aggradate the soil instead of degrade it? Yeah. So I think that's quite powerful, because it's also a mind shift, and you know that word is power. No, sounds are power. So if we stop saying like that soil is degraded, etc. No, I'm working towards aggradating that soil. Maybe it's not the correct grammatical term, etc., but it does mean what it means. No, it's like I'm making the things better than they were before. And how do we do this? Well, those are like some of the principles of agroecology, which I will share in a few minutes. So in terms of soil protection, this is a very simple experiment that we can do at home or with our kids. And it's all about soils generally are covered. When you go to the forest, they are covered. Either there are leaf litter on the ground, or there is grass growing somewhere. And so the soil is contained through the roots and through the structures that are there. And you can see that very, very simply here. The effect of having roots in the system, in the soil system, makes the water come out clean. Whereas if you don't have anything on the soil, that the soil is bare, you will have a soil that will erode nutrients and sediments, and that will create a number of issues downstream. Apart from the fact that you are losing nutrients, so in the end you are losing money. Any fertilizer that you applied or any amendment that you have done to your soil is just gone. The lady on the right is a farmer from St. Martin, and what she's showing there, apart from her lovely smile, is the terraces. So that's a really slopey farm. You can see the city or the urbanization on the upper part. It's a very slopey plot, and the way to deal with those slopes, and this is ancestral knowledge, it's indigenous knowledge from many places in the world, is to use terraces. Basically, a terrace is a system where you grow perpendicular to the slope. Yeah, instead of going in favor of the slope, you grow perpendicular, and you make like sort of stairways across that slope, and that will stop will reduce the water speed, and will also retain more nutrients there. And that's what you really want. That's when we speak about soil quality, it's not only the soil and the fertilizer and the nutrients, the chemical aspect, it's also the physical components and the biological components of this soil. And through terracing and through having like permanent soil covers, you protect more the soil. That's just a simple technique, and the principle is universal. The practices can vary from place to place. So in Britain, we could do something completely different from St. Martin, but still going forward with the principle of soil protection. On this slide, just to get inspiration from other places, this is a website that's called Humans Who Grow Food. And I found it very inspiring because it's like little stories of people who grow food in the cities, basically, or mostly in the city. And because we're in Britain, I found this one example of a person in London who shares the story, and the stories of transformation. This is a typical London, Birmingham, wherever British city, small space, urbanized, no soil, etc. And in just a few years, he transformed that into a really highly biodiverse nursery where food is produced, medicine is produced, and also community is produced. Because it's likely, like I said before, it's very likely that this guy is going to his neighbors to at least speak about that, or I don't know, look at the birds, or share a bit of the harvest, and that creates a bit more community. So that's like a really nice example, and you see that there's no soil there. It's completely out of the soil, but it's not soil-less. It's not relying on big technology or on water or energy to produce food. It's all pots that we have readily available in many instances. Size, this image is just to show that size matters. Depending on the fruits, depending on the crops that you are planning to have, you want to have more or less bigger root spaces. And that's also related to the physiology, the types of crops that you want. If you want a root crop, you want a big pot. If you want like herbs, you can manage with a smaller pot. So you can play around with that. Yeah, I'm sorry, it's in Spanish. Probably I could have found a slide in English, but it's also part of decolonizing the system here, no? Look, this is a great example. Do you know this place? Yeah. So this is where would, don't say, where would you say this happens? Which city in the world? Huh? Take a guess. It's no, it's French. It is Paris, yeah, absolutely. And it's not only Paris; it's a old train station that was recycled. That's from where the name comes from, La Recyclerie, the recycling shop or machine. And it's basically a unexpected spot. When you're crossing a bridge, you look on your side and you see that amazing long farm where there is food, there are animals, there's composting, and there's a school, like a farming horticultural school. Plus, yeah. Okay. So there's more activities, and so the building that you see, which was the used to be the train station. That's with the red roof in the back. That used to be the train station, and is now like a community restaurant. And like you're saying, Christina, that there are also other activities going on. So how to recycle stuff, how to make, even there are concerts. So this abandoned space became a really productive space in so many different fronts that that one gets overwhelmed, really. And an interesting detail as well is that you can see the rails of the train, the old train rails that are there. So on the one side, it's the restaurant, and on the other side, there's also a farm, but it's community owned. So there are two like major activities going on in the same space, where there are different governance schemes and different, interventions, different actors. Yeah. Uh-huh. Bois dormant. Yeah. Yeah, thanks for sharing. So this is like a Parisian example, which is not far away from London. It's nearly 2 hours and a half. And it's really worthwhile to get inspiration. It doesn't mean that we have to do the same things here, but we can get inspiration on how they are done. These are examples close to my heart. When I used to live in the Netherlands, this was one of our gardens, and you can see that not necessarily a super productive farm, but little things happening, and those little things, combined with like other houses, neighboring houses that were doing similar things, we could add up and have like a really nice dinner every once in a while, everything produced from the garden, and that's really inspiring. The image below was an innovation that sprouted from those conversations. It was the combination of a chicken coop with a compost pit. So we introduced the compost pit inside the chicken coop, and that had a dual effect. Really cool. Well, it has like three points. One is that if we would forget to feed the chicken, they could feed themselves. And that was a really advantageous, because then less likely to die from hunger, from starvation, the chicken, I mean. The other effect, which is quite evident, is that we were producing compost, no? And that's always encouraging and exciting. And the third effect that was quite unexpected as well was the cleanup of the coop. So before the compost pit was inside the chicken coop, the soil was very compacted. All the chicken manure was very compacted and had been there for years and years and years. When we started introducing the compost pit inside, the microorganisms that transform the organic matter into compost, into stable carbon phase, would also take care of the chicken manure. And so the soil became different in nearly a few months, barely a few months. The chicken coop soil changed completely the structure. It wasn't compacted anymore. You could see that it was more aerated, and also the smell wasn't as strong, if any, after the few months of composting. So that was unexpected, and it was for me a revelation that, when you change a structure, the functions of the system change, and you can get like many other hidden benefits or services that you wouldn't get if you don't combine the things. Because the services, if you want the compost apart and the chicken coop apart, would still bear the same benefits. But here combined, we had like a hidden benefit, and that was for me a really interesting revelation. Oops. Yeah, this is from another, from one of the neighbors. Other ideas on how to grow food. You can see that was the beginning of the season, so spring or something. So there's not much crops at that time, but how to rethink the lawns again. No, this used to be, of course, just like a lawn. Other examples. This is in Vienna, the University of Vienna. Different ways of producing. This is a demonstration plot, but still very productive and quite innovative and integrated within the embellishment of the buildings. It was, this urban garden was not separate from the activities of the gardeners. It was one of the plots that the gardeners were maintaining, and I think it was quite inspiring for me to see the different little practices that they implement in order to have some of the fruits. And I mean, Vienna has a climate that is not so far away from what we have here. So that means that why not, you know, at Coventry University or even at Bath, instead of having like sterile gardens, we could have like more productive and still beautiful food forests. Yeah? Just to change the name. Other sources of inspiration, no? Pots again, colors, art, combination of art and services, spaces that are maybe potentially a garden, the one with the bicycle, that's not really planted, but these are potential spaces. And in fact, there's a street nearby where this photo is taken that they have now transformed, and they have like small plots of medicinal and food crops around trees like this. And so these are potential spaces, sources of inspiration, and hidden gems within the city where we can improve the quality of the habitats there for us and for the other animals. This is also Vienna. They have a very unique system of community gardens, again for inspiration. And I like a lot this picture because it has like this empty table there, which is very reveals, you know, the purpose of the garden. It's not necessarily the food, but the harvesting of people speaking to each other. Imagine that we are in a century where we all have cars, or mostly have cars, and we're not discussing within ourselves anymore. That's very true. I don't know if it's so true for the people who are here, but in my context in Puerto Rico, everybody drives a car. So that means that we don't speak to each other anymore. We don't take the time in the transport to organize politically or socially or economic activities to do something different. We're all in our cars individually riling up against each other. And that's the famous phrase, no? Divide and conquer. Sorry for that. Divide and conquer. Like, they have divided us and we're not speaking to each other anymore. We're even fighting between each other. And so the system has won in that case. How do we reverse that? These urban gardens, these urban community gardens are one mechanism amongst others to reverse those nasty trends. Would you imagine food production in this image? Not at all. Whereas, apart from these like incredible bubbles, which are balconies, like nothing stands out. But when you look closer, if you look underneath the balconies, the architect actually designed spaces for food production in that place. So basically, the terrace, the balconies are a bit over the ground, and so these gardens are below ground, below the street level. That's quite innovative and quite revolutionary in the sense that the building has that intention since the onset. It wasn't added afterwards. It was designed as part of the process. Oh, you can see it more clearly on this image. You can see the hubs there, like the little bubbles, and the gardens that are below the level of the street. That's quite creative and it's very useful. You can see that people then, not only the users, but also the visitors can have access to that, embellished area. Something that I struggle with, especially in London, is like I don't get access to the allotments because they are close to the visitors. I don't have a key and I cannot see anything that's happening inside. And that's a pity because I know that there's a lot of activities and a lot of biodiversity behind the wall, but I cannot access it. Whereas in a place like this, or in a system that is thought out for all users to enjoy, then we can enjoy, and we can even speak with the farmers, and even maybe share some knowledge or some seeds. Taking back, still in Europe, but then more ancestral, like Middle Ages, there was already there has always been a need for food, and in creative ways. And this is an old castle nearby Madrid, where the gardens outside the castle were productive spaces. Many we can have a debate on the issues around feudalism, etc. But from a design point of view, it's amazing because the place has a purpose. So the outside of the castle has this purpose of producing food and probably animals as well. So this is still demonstration, and not only that. If you look at the image on the left, it doesn't. On the left here, you see the how do you call the bricks? They're not bricks, they're tiles. Yeah, thank you. So you have those tiles, and that's a fantastic irrigation system. So it's a rainwater harvesting system. The little plots are in a bit of a slope, and then the tiles are in a counter slope. So they are accommodated that when it rains, the water goes to the upper part of the slope, and then it irrigates by gravity the rest of the little plot. Amazing, very simple, and yet we forget that gravity exists. Radical example of urban community gardens is in Brazil. This is in Curitiba. There is this like incredible space where the municipality actually provided pieces of land to the neighboring families. So the only persons that can access these parts are the neighboring families, which are, they are sort of allotments, and they are producing a fraction of the food that the families eat. That's already a great deal because it's a savings from buying food externally. And they're probably connecting, they're probably organizing politically. And Curitiba is one of the most progressive places in Brazil where urbanism is very important. So it's like, it all makes sense. And we're speaking now more recently about a concept about agroecological urbanism. Like, it's not only about producing food in the city, but also like rethinking the structures of the city in order so that, it all makes sense. Energy, waste management, political organization, education, and the list can be quite long. This is in the University of Puerto Rico, not in the campus I was working on, but a nearby one. And this garden is the result of a student strike. So for a long time, there was a student strike, and they were relying on the people who would bring them food. And all of a sudden, somebody had an idea and said, like, dude, why are we expecting people to bring food during the strike? We have to produce our own. And that's how this garden, Huerto Semilla, which means like seed garden, semilla means seed in Spanish, it was initiated. And now it has become even like not only a demonstration place and a production place, but also it has become an educational place. So last year, or I think it's still currently going on, they had their first agroecological formative cycle with external people, not necessarily students from the university, but they were forming on the principles of agroecology. Other examples in the Caribbean, this is in Haiti, diversification. This is in St. Martin, and you can see also some of the practices and the effects of this urban farming in small spaces. So a lot of diversity, a lot of interactions, and especially harvesting community. And also Denisio here, which you can see, has a mission of educating and feeding his neighbors more than the supermarkets. And in feeding the neighbors, he's also providing a space for discussion and for organization and for also spreading the technical knowledge. No, everybody has a garden, or mostly, but they're not doing anything. And after spending a bit of time with Danicho, gardens are being transformed into food production spaces. As small as they can be, they're producing something. I'm thinking of a particular dish, for example, calalu. It's a particular dish from the Caribbean where you use sort of weeds and herbs, and people forget that those weeds and herbs grow nearby us. No? So that's another point, is that it's not only about enriching necessarily what's not there, but rather to recognize what is there, yeah, and take advantage of that. We've seen, for example, the walk that we did today. There were a lot of brambles and like blackberries around. There were roses. There were dandelions. These are weeds, really, that are inconspicuous to the supermarket, but they are there. They're producing food. They're producing beauty, and they're producing also conversation points for when a person goes by. It's like, oh, look, there are some blackberries. Come pick them up with me, and maybe you start a conversation. Maybe you make friends. Maybe you get married after. Okay, more examples. This is from Colombia, so different ways of producing food. This is like a circular garden, quite spectacular, and different modules on how to improve the root space for plants to grow if you don't have necessarily the space or the time to regenerate the soil. These little bottles are pest management systems, very simple. Instead of applying chemicals, you can have traps for non-beneficial insects. That's a really simple idea, and it works. In the tropics, it works. In some places, in temperate areas, it works. And why not, promote it more at the RHS? This other example is from Mauritius in East Africa. It is a greenhouse. So this was, of course, there was an investment there, but then the transformation of the system includes a lot of diversity and a lot of different colors. So just for the little story, this farmer applied for government incentives where they were incentivizing greenhouse and hydroponics, etc. She played the game. She got the incentive. She installed the system, and when the contract or whatever system was over, she transformed her system into a on-soil system. So no technology, less technology, but taking advantage of the infrastructure that was incentivized. So why not play the system as well? And this is the same. That's another view of that's the farmer, Sandrine. So implementing, you see that usually in urban gardens, we tend to go above the soil, and that the idea is that because you are in small spaces, you want to improve the root area for the plant. So you want to go up and also accumulate more soil, but it doesn't need to be. That's one practice amongst others. Some bit of irrigation, and do you notice the yellow cloths, the yellow patch? You don't see it? The yellow cartons that are hanging. Those are traps as well. These are like color traps with glue to trap whatever fly or whichever pest is affecting some of the crops there. And colors are important. This is another an image. This image is not mine, but it's from Cuba, and you can see like these colors attract different insects, and they are covered with either resins or oils that will attract the insect, and they will stick there. So there could be a trade-off there because we could endanger some of the beneficial insects, but mostly what we are doing is attracting non-beneficial insects for the farm and through colors. So basically the primary colors attract a lot of insects, and if you trap them, then there's less need for toxic chemicals. That's the simple logic of it. And this is true in horticultural systems, in coffee systems, and in temperate places. More examples of Mauritius. So this looks like a really advanced farm, but in fact, when the picture was taken, this garden had like, I think it was like 3 months, not even 4 months, and with the good with enough knowledge and enough manpower also to do the job, you can create a farm quite quickly. I mean, this was a small garden, but it looks advanced for the 4 months that it was growing. No? So, but there's a lot of knowledge behind that, probably a lot of trial and error before that experience in particular. This is the same farm. Well, it's not the same farm, it's the same island, so it's Mauritius again. And this was like a school garden. Just to show some images. Oh yeah, this is a really nice one. This is in Colombia. And in these 3 images, what we see is the same farming system, but then like small aspects of it. One is the circular garden, which attracts the eye and is very important. No? And the design of these circular gardens comes from indigenous knowledge, where there's a tree in the middle that sort of protects the surrounding crops that are growing. You also see a diversity of colors, and that's very nice because it confuses pests. If you're a cricket and you like a certain shade of green, and you have a whole field of only that shade of green, you're likely to call all of your friends and eat, treat on the whole shade of green that I like. But if you have, think of yourself as a cricket again, and you have you like this shade of green, and there's some shade of green in there, you will go eat. But then if the next row has another color, a purple or another shade of green, or maybe a yellowish thing, then you're likely to go away because you don't like those same colors. And that's the logic with the diversity as well, is to confuse insects, confuse pests, and that improves the capacity of your system to rely less on chemical warfare inputs. No, the other images is a herbal garden, very diversified as well. But imagine that there are many medicines there, and traditional medicine, even in temperate countries such as Britain, used to be mainly from plants and not from pharmaceuticals. What happened there? What have we forgotten and why? Yeah. And that other picture, that's Don Carlos. He's the farmer of this farm. And what he's showing there is a way to feed his cow differently. So he's feeding corn, maize, but then sprouted corn. And it has more advantages, not only more volume, but also more nutrients and amino acids and like micronutrients that the cows really like. And so that's a very simple practice that we don't do enough in terms of sprouting. And sprouting is very easy; it's just water. And that's a often forgotten type of farming agriculture. No? This sprouting, alfalfa or sunflower sprouting. That's the type of urban farming that we can do in our kitchen without light and with very little resources. It's delicious, it's nutritious, and if you buy it at the supermarket, it's quite expensive. Whereas if you do it at home, it's quite cheap. Yeah, and it is delicious. Yeah, and so you can imagine that the cows, they go crazy when they see the sprouts, all of the sugars, etc. And this is maybe a really nice source of inspiration for our livestock breeders in this region. It's sprouting more. other practices, maybe not necessarily related to the food production itself, but to the transformation, is drying stuff, no? And this is a very low-tech solar dryer to dry all kinds of herbs, all kinds of fruits, all kinds of leaves, medicinal plants, etc. And okay, maybe we don't have enough sun here for doing that all year round, but during the summer we have sun. We could rely on transformation of it's a form of preservation of the food. We do how you call it, in brine, fermentation in brine, or you can do sort of things like kimchi and preserve jams and stuff like that. And those are other practices that allow us to extend. No? This is an inspiration from the tropics again, but drying is a often forgotten way of transforming food to keep it for a long time. More, let's say, I will annoy you with just a few more slides, not many more, but these are more some extra examples of things that can be done in urban areas in order to have different benefits. So the palettes over there are what they call bog hotels, no? Like, so specific structure that we put in the garden for insects to thrive during the winter. The one below with the sort of little cloth, that's a way of maintaining temperature for like crops that are not necessarily frost tolerant or that prefer warmer temperatures. The image on the right here, the bottom right, is a little house, and that is a chicken coop in an urban setting, completely urban, and the innovative design there is to also be able to move it if we need, no? So it's mobile as well. And the one on the upper left is a really cool one because it's a transgressive way of producing tomatoes. No, normally we produce tomatoes from bottom up, but they are actually vines, so they can grow head down, and that's like quite revolutionary because you can see that it's in soil, but then it's in the air, and they're growing upside down, and they're still producing. That's quite amazing and cool, and it's a way also of making more of the space that we have. So in urban settings, we normally have very little space, really. So you can use different layers of ideas like this, and you can take more advantage on the vertical area, and very low tech and low resource investment. But it requires for you to know the plants, for you to develop your own knowledge and your own trials and error and experiences and innovations. Maybe one of the final examples I want to share is in Burkina Faso, in Ouagadougou, is a West African capital, very dense, very urbanized, very sprawled, but still there are urban farms there. And I say farms because they're not necessarily gardens. However, they are temporary, so they have seasonal periods where food is produced. This is the image during the wet season, so it's flooded, the areas, and during the dry season, they are transformed into actual urban farms, yeah? And it's quite radical what is done, and the amount of economic, let's say, like the economic benefit that these spaces that are temporary produce for people. So they work there only a few months per year, but they produce a lot of food that is more often than not sold on the same spot. So there's less transport, and people can access and see the farm and see the practices. I'm not saying they're super organic, because they're not, but they're still producing food locally, and that's already a big stunt and a big challenge to the food system as we know it today. More examples. Nurseries without plastics, no, directly on the ground. They're making the nursery for the onions and not necessarily relying on heavy technology. maybe because it's not there, maybe, because this is a traditional practice as well. This is also Ouagadougou. This used to be one of the gardens. This used to be one of the houses where I lived, and it's a really beautiful garden space. And there was a corner that there was nothing, and this is just to show you an example of what can be done in just a few months. Again, you don't need much, but you need the intention to have there. And you see that we shifted from a food desert, so a space of garden that was compacted, etc., to actually a forest garden where we have papaya, moringa, cotton, we had loofah, we had basil, and so we had our own, Burkina Faso pesto with only the things that were from the garden, and that you can imagine that food was a treat, a real treat. Yeah, that's me when I had a beard. And this is in Spain, in Valencia. It's a urban farm, peri-urban farm, very extensive and not organic at all. But they have this really interesting system of water connection. This is in Valencia. It's called L'Horta de Valencia, the food garden of Valencia. It's in the outskirts of the city. And it's highly toxic, highly monoculture, but they share the water. And so every farmer has a few seconds per day or a few minutes per day of flooding irrigation like that. And they even they're so advanced, and this is one of the oldest systems in Europe, that they are so advanced in this aspect that they have developed a court of the water, El Tribunal de las Aguas. It's like a place where a moment on the week where people argue against each other. How many minutes did my neighbor take from me for the irrigation? He didn't cut the system when he had to, and they get arrangements there. And it's very Middle Ages, but it's still happening today. And I think that's quite spectacular. And a place like this one would benefit of having a bit more diversity, a bit more ecologization rather than technification. Veneno means poison. And despite the fact that there's a lot of external input there and chemical inputs, you still also have like very diversified smallholder organic gardens, no chemicals and a different system. And this looks quite similar to what we have seen before. Now, the idea in this Horta de Valencia is how do we get from the monoculture extensive system to a extensive system that is also diversified and produces, more opportunities for habitats, for birds, or for microorganisms in the system. And that's a real challenge. How do you convince? How do you co-create different designs, alternative designs, based on the benefits and the pros and cons of all the spectrum? Okay, I just passed that slide. This is an example, a last example of syntropic agriculture. Syntropic agriculture is a way of producing trees that feed the soil, yeah, and they are very tight altogether. So basically, in the first few years of a syntropic system, what you want is to produce the more biomass that you can in order to prune it and apply it on the soil. I'm actually looking into systems in the UK where we could, or like demonstration experimental plots where we could get inspiration from these tropical systems. How to grow plants that produce biomass that we will cut, we will prune, not to feed ourselves, but to feed the soil, to make it better, to aggradate it, no? There's a whole study on this. And this is my final slide. It's about rethinking the urban. What does urban mean, no? And this is an example from Denmark with the circular communities, but this circular urbanization have a dedicated space for food production and for green infrastructure, and it's less invasive and more appealing to the eye to have a bit more of green than of gray. And with this, I finish. That say like the 3 points that I want to share is that we have to continue mapping the places where urban agriculture is happening. We need to promote more exchanges between ourselves, with farmers, with students, etc. And we have to also support transformation of practices. So let's shift away from chemical toxic inputs to more diversified farming systems that don't rely on this system, on these inputs. Yeah. So thank you for being here, and I hope this was useful and enjoyable. Yeah. Thank you.
So we have a microphone to ask questions. I think it's better if we are recording it, and then it will be audible on the recording. Hi, can I just say that you reminded me on Zanzibar when I went to France in the 1970s, I used to be sent out with the other kids to collect pissenlit, which is Zanzibar. So, but we don't do that anymore, do we? Anyway, my question was, is there any relevance in what you've done and what you've been talking about to the kind of modern plant producing industry where they produce hybrids and maybe they're sort of controlled not to be usable the next year, or whether you have intellectual property which limits their use? And is that something that you look at, presumably an important part of this is actually collecting the seeds and reusing the next year?
Yeah, definitely. Thank you for your question. So, I mean, we are in opposition in the system, no? There's a capitalistic view of using natural resources as a source of extraction, of taking knowledges from indigenous people in order to market those knowledges and market those resources that they have. And there is an opposition, which is, it's not a violent one, but to a certain extent it is, because this hybridization of the plants, this genetically modification of the plants, it's all fighting against the restoration of soil quality. We're making plants that are resistant to poor soil quality. That's the purpose of hybrids. That's the purpose of GMOs. In the end is not to feed the hungry. It's to create plants, and not only plants, create products that can be sold, and these plants are basically resistant to poor soil conditions. Do we really want that? That's a really ethical, philosophical question. We need to live, but if we make the soil better, we don't really need those improved varieties that will, that we need to buy again and again and again. And that's the real challenge here. Is this opposition when I say that these principles of agroecology are intended for farmers to be self-sufficient, and the system doesn't want that. That's the bottom line. How do we make ourselves more self-sufficient? So my research is informed from those industrial activities, and it's informed, and in a way, it's countering those practices, but with the proposition, with the proposal, not necessarily with the protesting focus. No, I'm proposing that we look into what people know, what people are doing already that works, what people are doing in order to maintain their livelihoods, because farming is more than 10,000 years old. Hybrids are what, 50 years old? So what's really, when we speak about alternative agriculture, is organic really an alternative, or is it the mainstream and the chemical industrialization period is the alternative, has been the latest technological alternatives for farmers? That's a real question. I don't like it when they say that we are working on alternative farming. We are not the alternative. We've been mainstream forever. Yeah. What's your viewpoint? Why you brought this question?
Well, I have a bit of a background in intellectual property, so I was just aware that there are, that it is a subject, so I just wondered.
Yeah.
I mean, usually you're talking about maybe not urban agriculture, but something
Yeah.
that's a little bit larger, but I just wondered if it was missing here, which obviously you feel very strongly about.
Yeah, definitely. And the thing is, like, can you really copyright life? No, because these intellectual properties, the companies, what they're doing is they're not only making patents for the specific plants or crops that they have, they are making patents for the genes. And this is abstract completely because you cannot even touch a gene. You know, what is it anyways? And when a company tells me, oh, your farm has been polluted with my genes, it's like, what are you even saying? Like, this is the normal thing that should happen. Genetics, you know, pollen travels. Like, why are you even charging people? And there's something really nasty about it. It's like the capitalization of this. So making a copyright of life means that you're not even respecting what it is. Copyrights are intended for things, for art, and for like ideas. But genes, I think that's very aggressive. It's very violent to the rest of society. Yeah. That's my viewpoint. I do feel strong about it.
Hi, thank you very much for a talk that was very, very, very interesting. And I have so many questions, but I'll start with one, and then if there is space, I'll ask another one. I start with, when you showed that photograph of a lawn, you said we don't need these lawns, we need actually kind of vegetable gardens grown on the lawns. And I could see also from many photographs of the area, the urban areas that we translated into vegetable gardens, the interaction, I mean, there are cars right on the edge of it. And my concern is, what is the link? Or is there a link between, or is there anything we can do? Because these plants will absorb the fumes of all the circulation of cars. And how do we combine these two things? And going back to what the previous person said about dandelions, and you mentioned dandelion, during the lockdown, I have been walking around the hills and I have picked up so much dandelion that I've eaten. And I have noticed the difference between the dandelions that grow in the hills, for example, away from the roads, along the skyline above, which are small and not as luscious as the ones that grow by the roadside, where all the cars circulate. And we always, my husband and I say, why are these so luscious and the other ones are not? Is there actually, do they absorb the fumes? Is there something that, and how do we avoid that? Is it good to have urban gardens that absorb this stuff?
That's a really good question. Thank you for a really interesting comment. So there's a dual answer there. I don't know why the ones that were closer to the road were bigger for you in the case. It can be many different things: sunlight, nutrients, water, maybe stress, and the stress makes them bloom bigger. So it's a complex response, let's say. The other thing about the fumes and like the toxicity in the city, we live in the city. I mean, we are exposed to these chemicals all the time. We smoke, we drink, we sleep late. So we are already exposed to those. That's one of the things. Now, what to do with those is like also be conscious. And again, it's like a knowledge intensive approach to food collection. Is like, okay, there are certain plants that may accumulate more toxic nutrients than more toxic elements than others. For example, tomatoes, they do naturally accumulate copper, plum. They accumulate a heavy metal that is from the air. Sunflowers accumulate zinc, I think. And so plants have their different ways of growing. Now, maybe a tomato is not ideal for the city, but would you rather not eat than have a homegrown tomato? Because the alternative is the supermarket tomato, and that you don't even know where it comes from, you know? Yeah. So there's no really like a clear answer to that. It's more like trade-offs, you know? We already live in the city. We are exposed to these fumes all the time. Does it really make a difference? Like from a tomato from the supermarket, from the homegrown? I'd rather have my homegrown and get exposed to the same elements that I am exposed rather than to have like chemicals that were, you know, applied in China. I don't know, like Chinese garlic. I don't know where it comes from. I don't even know what they put in it, and it has traveled a long distance. Whereas my tomato, you know, as much as it accumulates an element from the air that is not necessarily healthy, we're already in it, but it's my tomato.
I like this idea that we are not the purists, and if we, you know, the glass is always harmful, and
Yeah.
at least we have something in it.
Yeah. And of course, it's all debatable, it's dynamic, and yeah.
So there was something that we started talking about when we were walking, and we started the walk at the farmers market, and then we talked about how, like, who are farmers market for, and so farmers markets are great because the veg didn't travel a long distance, but then they are not always so affordable for people. So sometimes it's really a garden grown tomato bought at the farmers market is a luxury item that you are unlikely to be able to afford if you are, you know, like a big family and you want tomatoes that are probably going to come from Poland or something like that.
Yeah.
So what can we do about this? Like, how can we make it more affordable, or so that it's like an ethical choice that is not just for the few people who can afford it, how can it be for the masses? Yeah,
that's a real question. The democratization of food, no, the access to food. And the answer is very complex. I mean, there's no single silver bullet for that. But the first step is to actually discuss the problem. You know, when we go to the farmer markets and you don't see any Black people, any Indian people, and only like white persons, it's a problem. And when you see that, look at the prices, it's a problem. So as a farmer, you want to think about who you're feeding. Are you feeding your pocket, or are you feeding your community? And so that makes a whole difference in where you sell the products. No, so that's the first element. The other element is for consumers and probably for less resource endowed consumers that, you know, have to go to Lidl because they have no other choice. There is also like an element of democratization there. Like Lidl is producing, you can find nice organic products at Lidl. And the thing with the organic certification is that farmers do get a 20% surplus on the farm gate price, but the consumer has to pay it. So that means that only people who can afford that 20% extra are eating healthy. Yeah, in principle, that doesn't make sense at all. Like, we're still in a classist system where the rich get all the benefits while the poor get all the shit. Yeah, and that needs to be transformed. How do we go about that? There are many different ways. One of the ways I have found is to actually, or that I try to implement, is to actually promote that, you know, let's produce more, even if it's in a small pot. Like, take advantage of the knowledge, of the resources that you have. But in poorly endowed households, that's not the priority. And so, how do you go about with that? That's a really complex question. Maybe, you know, the one, let's say, the colonial approach is to already recognize what we have. No? So, for example, the medicines, the dandelions are edible, but maybe your poor neighbor, your poor resource endowed neighbors don't know this, but there's a job that we have to do there, you and me, to go out there and speak with the few neighbors that tell them, look, this is edible. Did you know it has these benefits? Did you know? And sort of like a educational campaign in all fronts possible. That would be my a first approach. And then there are other like public policy approaches where why do organic farmers have to pay for the certification, as opposed to conventional farmers who are applying toxic pesticides pay for the pollution, a pollution tax. That doesn't make sense, that people who are trying to make their best are paying for a certification and yeah, okay, they get an overprice, but why not tax the pollutants? That's a real policy also that could be make products more accessible. Because one of the reasons why conventional farming is cheaper than organic to produce is because there are incentives, and the application of chemicals makes it a bit easier, to control a certain pest. But we're in a warfare agriculture. We're not in a healthy, nutrient-rich food production system for the poor. We're applying pesticides in order to produce more, in order to get more money, and that's the mainstream food that we have. But like I said before, this is the alternative since the 1960s. Before that, it was non-existent, and the main reason these are like I stress a lot the word warfare agriculture is because most of the inputs that are used in modern agriculture, industrial agriculture, are a result of the Second World War. They're a recycling of the system, napalm, the Agent Orange, became herbicide. The ammonia from the bombs became fertilizer. The tanks became tractors. And so you can see that there's a big parallel between warfare and industrial agriculture. And it's not neutral, it's very political. The same people that created the warfare inputs also created the farming inputs. And that doesn't make sense. Like, how can we leave the food that we eat in the hands of the people that kill us? Yeah, please.
While you were talking, I actually had an interesting idea. I'm sure that the important people have thought about the possibility of doing nothing about the democratization and again about using front gardens and house gardens to create vegetable gardens. It just occurred to me that if I had a garden, and I live in a block of flats, and we have gardens which are not used for anything except flowers, but I thought most people hire a gardener. Why not then
Hire a farmer?
Hire a farmer?
That's the
Because that means I don't have to develop the knowledge. And in truth, at this stage in my life, I might be able to do it, but I may not be able to do it. And so I thought, I hire somebody and have an agreement that they can do my pot, and I get some of the harvest, and then they can sell the rest. And I just wondered whether that has been thought of.
Yeah. It's done in I've seen examples of that, but I think it's a great idea and I love it. Hire a farmer, not a landscaper. It can be a slogan. Yeah. Oh, you're a landscaper, yeah. You
some gardens do have food producing elements, have helped them.
maybe it's a marketing line that you could use, you know, edible landscape. Nice.
Yes, I don't know if everybody knows, but there are 1 or 2 community orchards up on Barfoot Hill. And it's very noticeable that when it's in fruit, there are some people who will just go and take loads and loads and loads of apples. And I wonder if you think that as society here in the UK and similar countries, maybe we're a sort of we've gone beyond a stage where we're capable of being sort of communal society where we're going to share and do, you know, operate in the way that people have in some of the areas that you've shown where there are communal facilities.
If I understood properly, you mean that some people take more advantage than others and don't share?
People, when fruit is ripe, some people will go and take enormous amounts of apples, they'll empty some trees.
Okay.
So that there isn't enough for other people.
Okay. Are other people also harvesting?
It's very variable. Some people will just take a few, and then there'll be people who go along
and harvest a lot and don't share. But you know, at least they harvest it. Yeah. Uh-huh.
And from one day to the next, we realized all the walnuts are gone. So we assumed that those who look after the garden maybe harvested it and did something for them, but we don't know. But apples, which are not so precious, let's say, you do find that somebody else picked them up and put them into bags outside the gate. And so we, a few times, be able to take some home. But the walnuts, the more unusual things, you just don't get to the point of seeing them ready for you to pick, you know, some.
Yeah. I mean, I have no like coherent answer for this because I don't know the exact situation. I don't know who is, you know, in charge of the different activities. But there is a Mexican indigenous philosophy of producing in thirds. So you produce a third for your family, a third for the market, and a third, you know, for thieves and nature, basically insects or the rest. So why not? You know, like we don't need to be greedy as well as producers. We don't necessarily need all of the harvest. We can satisfy ourselves with a fraction of it, and there's a fraction that it will always be not loss, because this is not loss. Thank God there's people harvesting a lot and they're doing juice or whatever they are, because maybe that's their only source of income, you know, or a major one. And you don't really need the apple juice to sell it, but maybe they do, you see? So I always go from the starting point that whatever people do, they do it for a reason. It's not just to harm the rest. That sometimes, you know, that's their only source of inspiration, and it's of income, and it's free for them to actually have a living and maybe feed their child or whatever, you know. So I always go from that perspective, unless I'm wrong, unless I'm proven wrong. Yeah. Try anyway. Does that resonate with you? Like, would it make sense? Like the people who are harvesting a lot maybe need it more. Yeah.
Which is, so there are these ideas that there is a shortage of food, and there might be, like the planet has a capacity to yield how much, I don't know, and that not be enough for all of the mankind as we are getting more and more. And somehow this is, you know, I sometimes feel that this idea is just used to hide the fact that so much of the Earth's surface or the productive lands, a high percentage is the private land that you you can't access.
Mm.
So I just really, do you think there's a shortage? Do you think that we need like to use very pesticide intensive gardening so that we can produce enough for everybody, or
Yeah.
what is your?
So one of the figures that we should look at when addressing this question is what's the rate of food waste? Yeah. So if we go to the mainstream, like food system, supermarket stuff, what is the rate of food waste? It's enormous. I don't remember the exact number, but it's enormous compared to what's actually used by humans as food. So from that starting point is that there's a lot of waste, and that shouldn't happen. There's even laws for people not to go into, how they call it here, dumpster, skipping, yeah, something like that. People that go in the waste bins of the supermarkets to get like the remainders, because the idea is to sell, not to feed people. And so if you are not in that logic, if you are in a logic of feeding people rather than selling, then there's less food waste. And so my main point here is that mainstream food system advocates say that we need to produce more, but we already have enough food to fill the whole planet. What we need to think about is the redistribution of those food and the reduction of food waste. And so that's the point. I used to have the numbers in my work, but I don't have them in my mind at the moment. But it's very high. Yeah. They put bleach, all sorts of nasty things, and they don't even compost it. Some of that food waste could even be composted, but not even. So I think that's the real question. Like, is it really a matter of production, or is it a matter of the distribution of the ingredients? Yeah. Those are great questions. Thank you so much.
Well, I think that this is about the end of our time. So many thanks for this very thought-provoking talk, and also for the good questions. And yeah, thanks a lot for coming to that and sharing your thoughts with us.
My pleasure. I'm gonna just ask if there are people that are connected online that would like to maybe comment or ask something.
Thank you, George. I just want to thank you so much, because it has been a wonderful and inspiring lessons for all humanity. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Silvia. Thank you for being here. You cannot see her. No.
Can you see me?
Yeah, I see you, but not the audience.
Okay.
Thank you, Silvia.
Thank you, George.
Okay, we close. All right, thank you. Benji, thank you for being here.